The clink of ceramic mugs and the hiss of steaming milk greeted Ava Thompson before she'd even turned the corner onto Maple Street. At 5:45 a.m., the sun was still a pale sliver on the horizon, but Brew and Company was already humming to life. Ava punched in, the small alarm on her phone marking the start of another 12-hour shift. She crossed to the espresso machine, running her fingers over its polished chrome handles as if greeting an old friend. In her crisp black polo and logo apron, she slid behind the counter with the ease of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times. From her first order, quad shot, half and half, extra shot on the side, to the last morning latte, every movement was precise. The tamp of the grounds, the hiss of the steam wand, the swirl of milk into a perfect rosetta. She greeted each customer with a genuine smile, their names written in careful script atop cardboard sleeves, but beneath the warmth, Ava carried the familiar undercurrent of tension. The head barista, Claire, a white woman 2 years her junior, stood behind her, scrutinizing each pour. When Claire took over for a moment, adjusting the grinder's dose without a word, Ava felt the familiar sting of a silent judgment. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" At the register, a regular named Mrs. Harrison peered up over her glasses. "You make the best cappuccino," she said softly. Then, as an afterthought, "You've ever thought of going to barista school? I hear they teach real technique there." Ava forced a laugh. "This is barista school," she replied gently. Mrs. Harrison's lips tightened, and she nodded, as if filing that away for next time. Behind them, a trainee struggled with a complicated pour-over setup. A small group of white customers shifted impatiently in line. Ava stepped in to assist. 3 simple steps. But when it was done, the trainee instantly reasserted control. "No thanks." Ava felt her heart tighten, but she shrugged it off and moved on. By mid-morning, the shop was packed. White-collar workers tapped on laptops at communal tables. Suburban parents fidgeted with toddlers at the pastry case. Claire barked a correction when Ava scribed a name too small on a cup lid. The store manager, Mr. Keller, passed by and asked in a clipped tone if Ava needed help keeping up. Ava nodded, though she had every drink completed before he even spoke. As the line dwindled, Ava breathed deeply, the aroma of dark roast grounding her. She wiped a stray drip from the counter, squared her shoulders, and glanced at her reflection in the stainless steel fridge, determined eyes framed by a neat bun. Under the polite smiles and casual microaggressions, she reminded herself why she loved this work. She could bring comfort in a cup, connection in conversation, and excellence in every pour. Today, she would keep her head high, and, if necessary, speak up for the respect she deserved. The morning rush had barely settled when Ava heard the first gasp. A sharp, panicked intake of air, slicing through the steady hum of milk steam and soft indie music. She was wiping down the counter, the scent of freshly ground beans, still warm under her fingertips, when a well-dressed man at the far end of the shop clutched his throat and staggered backward. His cappuccino sloshed over the edge of the cup and pooled on the floor like spilled blood. Customers froze. The trainee barista at the register stood slack-jawed, phones raised but unowned, as though they didn't yet know what 911 meant in this moment. Ava dropped her cloth and pushed around the counter, her heart hammering like a piston. The man, Mr. Lawson, a regular in a tailored suit who always tipped with a crisp 20, turned red as the espresso machine's shot indicator light. His lips parted in silent panic. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice calm but urgent, stepping between a cluster of wide-eyed patrons. No one answered. She placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, can you breathe?" He shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. She recognized the classic signs: clenched jaw, panicked eyes, inability to speak. Without hesitation, she slipped behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and delivered a series of upward thrusts. The crowd parted like the sea around her. On her third try, a chunk of soggy biscotti flew from his mouth in a spray of coffee and foam. He coughed, a wet, desperate sound, and Ava immediately supported him under his arms, coaxing him to lean forward as he gasped for air. She urged him to rest against the counter, knelt beside him, and checked his pulse as nurses in the audience murmured relief. Ava's legs shook, but her hands were steady when she asked for water. She found a paper cup, filled it, and guided it to his lips. Each sip was a small victory. Around them, the shop exhaled, quiet sobs of relief, tremors of applause, an almost reverent hush. The trainee, finally coming alive, dialed 911, voice trembling. Between breaths, Mr. Lawson managed a grateful, unsteady, "Thank you," his gratitude more profound than any tip he'd ever left. Ava offered him a steadying smile, her uniform damp at the collar, hair stray under the edge of her cap. She brushed a damp curl behind her ear and said, "Just glad you're okay." Paramedics arrived to take over, the whine of sirens a somber counterpoint to the shop's awed silence. Ava stepped back behind the counter, hands pressed against her apron, as her coworkers gathered around, some with tears in their eyes, others with shame coloring their cheeks for their earlier inaction. The manager knelt beside her, voice low, "Ava, that was incredible." She nodded, still catching her breath, aware that the moment had shifted something fundamental in the shop's atmosphere. Phones were already lighting up with the video the trainee had recorded. The decisive thrusts, the relieved cough, the grateful smile. Ava watched the screen for a moment, heart pounding, as the wave of compassion and shock washed over her. In those shared seconds of crisis and clarity, she realized that every cup she'd ever poured mattered less than the life she had just saved, and that her skill, her calm, and her courage had become something far more powerful than any latte art. By the time the paramedics wheeled Mr. Lawson out the door, Ava's earbuds were already buzzing with the faint chime of incoming alerts. Her coworkers' hands trembled as they replayed the footage on a cracked screen phone. Ava's decisive Heimlich thrusts, the spray of coffee and foam, the gasp that followed. In that moment, each heart-stopping second stretched into eternity, and someone pressed share. Within minutes, the clip appeared on the shop's group chat. Crew members paused mid-cleanup to huddle around the glowing screen, astonished at how crisp and clear the video looked. Ava's calm face lit by the overhead pendants, the scattered customers frozen in raw surprise, and Mr. Lawson's ragged cough echoing like a chorus of relief. A barista in the back tapped save, then opened Instagram, captioned the clip, "Black barista saves choking customer rar brew hero," and hit post. The first ripple came from Brew & Company's official page, an unassuming repost that tagged Ava and the shop location. When the notifications began, Ava was refilling cups at the cold brew station. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from her best friend, "OMG, you're trending." She slipped behind the brewer, swiped her screen, and saw it. 5,000 views, then 25,000, each number jumping faster than she could blink. Comments poured in. "That was so brave." "CPR saved a life." "Why didn't anyone else help?" And beneath the praise, a few bitter notes. "Why can't white baristas do their jobs?" Is this really news? By lunchtime, the clip had escaped the confines of Maple Street. It landed on TikTok's For You page, under the hashtag #BrewHero, where it hit 500,000 views in the first hour. Strangers stitched it into their own reaction videos, overlaying dramatic music. Local news anchors grabbed screenshots for evening broadcasts. An EMT trainer tweeted, "This is how you do it. CPR works." Ava stood behind the counter, trying to focus on the next order, but every ding of the register felt like an echo of her red-faced triumph, and everyone's stunned silence. Meanwhile, corporate headquarters stirred. An email marked urgent reached the district manager's inbox. Viral CPR video, immediate comment needed. The PR team drafted a boilerplate thank you to our ever-dedicated staff and scheduled a press release for later that afternoon. But that canned statement couldn't contain the outrage bubbling under the surface. Customers demanded to know why it had taken a black barista, rather than the white staff, to save a life in their privileged coffee shop. Ava's own phone buzzed again and again, interview requests from morning shows, DMs from CPR instructors offering free certification, even a text from her mother. "We're so proud, but be careful. This might open some eyes you didn't want open." She took a shaky breath, palmed the cool steel of the espresso machine, and realized the rescue had been only the first step. Now her hands, once steady only with steamed milk and tamped grounds, had become a symbol of action, and that symbol was taking on a life of its own. In every share, every like, every outraged question about bias, in a place meant to serve everyone equally. The morning after the video went viral, Ava arrived for her shift to find tension pulsing through Brew & Co.'s back room like an undercurrent. The district manager, Mr. Keller, handed her a perfunctory thank you card, stamped with the corporate logo. His eyes quickly flicking away, he muttered that headquarters had released a statement acknowledging your quick thinking, but wanted to be sure the footage wasn't, over-dramatized for the internet. Ava folded the card and pressed it into her apron pocket, tasting bile at the implied disbelief in her skill. By midday, corporate's lukewarm press release had appeared on the company website and then been quietly buried beneath new menu announcements. It read, "We commend our staff member for her prompt response in a dire situation and remind our customers that all Brew & Company employees receive standard safety training. No mention of bias, no apology, no promise to do better." Meanwhile, a follow-up email from local management arrived on every employee's phone. Friendly reminder that social media posts should be vetted through corporate. Please refrain from posting additional content without approval. The subtext was as clear as coffee stain on a white tablecloth. Ava's moment of heroism was now a liability. Back behind the counter, the baristas whispered in low tones whenever she passed. Claire, the head barista, nudged the trainee and tilted her head in Ava's direction, eyes rolling so subtly it felt like a slap. One coworker whispered across the milk frother. I heard she only did it so she'd go viral. And look where that got us. Our shop's in the news for bias now. Another snorted as Ava handed her a stack of clean cups. Hope corporate finds your next stunt inspiring. Each comment stabbed at Ava's chest, and she forced her smile wider, each breath a reminder of all she'd held inside. Outside the storefront, things erupted in a different way. A handful of angry customers, some in designer coats, some clutching iced lattes, stood on the sidewalk with homemade signs. What happened to white tie CPR? Barista or Barkrista? They demanded to see real documentation of the rescue, shouting that the video was too perfect and clearly edited. Their voices cracked through the shop's glass wall, rattling tip jars and hushed conversations. Inside, regulars like Mrs. Harrison looked uncomfortable, glancing at Ava with eyes full of shame and confusion. Yet not all the noise was hostile. Across the street, a small group of supporters, college students, a few parents pushing strollers, held signs reading CPR for all and thank you, Ava. They cheered quietly whenever a friend filmed them for Instagram, their solidarity a thin but vital lifeline. Ava saw their hopeful faces reflected in the coffee machine's metal casing and felt the spark of courage flicker back to life. By closing time, Ava was exhausted. Her hands trembled each time she steamed milk. She retreated to the storeroom, heart pounding, and dropped to a stool. The whitewashed walls seemed to close in as she wrestled with the weight of every slight, every backhanded compliment, every murmur of suspicion. Would speaking out risk her job? Could she force the company to own its bias? Or would staying silent betray everything she stood for? When the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Ava stood, squared her shoulders, and wiped her palms on her apron. The video of her CPR rescue had become more than a viral moment. It was now a test of her resolve. And as she switched off the espresso machine light, she made a decision. She would no longer let anyone question her truth in whispers or hide behind corporate platitudes. She would speak up, even if it meant facing the full glare of Brew & Company's uncomfortable bias. By the end of the morning rush, the viral CPR video had taken on a life of its own, and not all of it flattering. Halfway through her shift, Ava's phone buzzed again with a terse email from corporate headquarters. Subject line, Public Relations Follow-Up. The body read in carefully neutral language, "Thank you for your swift action during yesterday's incident. Please be reminded that Brew & Company employees undergo regular safety training. No praise. No acknowledgement of her unique heroism. No recognition that every other staffer had frozen." Ava stared at the screen, her chest tightening as she scrolled through the lukewarm boilerplate. She felt both unseen and misrepresented, her life-saving skill reduced to a footnote. In the staff room 10 minutes later, The tension was palpable. Claire, the head barista, hovered by the supply shelves with her arms crossed, eyes flicking to Ava each time she passed. "Corporate says you saved the day," Claire said, voice low and clipped. "Good for you." The emphasis on you stung like a spoonful of burnt espresso. A trainee snickered behind Claire's back. "Maybe now they'll let you froth the milk on your own." Whispers circled the room like steam. That Ava had chased likes and views, that she'd made the shop look incompetent, that her stunt would cost them customers. No one spoke up in her defense. Each jab felt like a small drip of scalding coffee on her skin. Outside, the regular crowd began to fracture. A group of wealthy suburban patrons, silver-haired couples in designer coats, clustered by the door, murmuring about viral fame gone too far. One woman tapped her foot impatiently and called through the glass, "Is this stunt going to be on the menu from now on?" Another man shook his head. "I come here for coffee, not Instagram theater." Their jeers rattled the doorframe. Ava felt them as a physical weight. Yet across the street, a handful of supporters had gathered with hand-lettered signs. "CPR saves lives, not likes." "Thank you, Ava." Their cheers were quieter but no less urgent. Every time Ava caught their eyes, she blinked back a surge of gratitude and resolve. Around midday, the district manager approached her at the register, eyes darting as if expecting applause. Instead, he offered a stiff nod and said, "We've logged the incident. Let's keep things professional." His tone implied that professionalism meant silence. Ava forced a polite smile, handed off the next latte, and pressed her lips together to keep from arguing. Yet inside, her thoughts swirled. Was she supposed to be grateful for this hollow recognition? Should she swallow the humiliation of being both celebrated and dismissed? Each cheery, "Have a nice day," felt like salt in a wound. That evening, after the shop closed, Ava lingered behind the counter alone. The lights were dimmed, the espresso machine hissed its final sigh, and the sweet scent of roasted beans hung in the air. She pressed her palms to the cool steel countertop and closed her eyes, replaying every insult, every smirk, every hesitant "thank you" she'd received. Then she thought of the man she'd saved, of the life she'd steadied when everyone else faltered. She felt the unwavering support of the strangers who cheered her from across the street, and the silent encouragement of every viewer who'd shared her story. In that charged stillness, Ava made a decision. She would not allow whispers or platitudes to write her truth. She would demand a real reckoning, both for herself and for every colleague who could so easily be overlooked in an emergency. With steady breath, she flicked off the lights and walked out into the night, determined to make her voice heard beyond the confines of the coffee counter. The morning after Ava's defiant decision to speak up, Brew & Company's headquarters was in full crisis mode. At 8 a.m., the CEO, Brent Marshall, convened an emergency video conference with regional managers, PR executives, and human resources directors. The screen flickered with anxious faces in navy blazers and crisply pressed shirts. Marshall's own expression was grave as he opened with, "We have a problem that transcends a single shop. It's a stain on our brand and on our values." A muted gasp rippled through the attendees when the legal counsel confirmed that share prices had dipped nearly 3% in the last 24 hours. Investors rattled by headlines accusing the chain of systemic bias. By mid-morning, local management in Ava's district received a detailed memo. Draft and release a sincere public apology. Commit to bias awareness training. Launch a community life-saving skills fund. That afternoon, Marshall stood at a podium in the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Brew & Co.'s flagship office. The company logo, a stylized, steaming mug, glowed behind him. Reporters from trade publications and local TV stations filled rows of folding chairs. Flanked by the head of HR and the PR director, Marshall cleared his throat and read from a prepared statement. "On behalf of Brew & Company, I apologize unreservedly to Ms. Ava Thompson and to every member of our staff and customer community. The heart of our mission is to bring people together, and we have fallen short of that promise. Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory annual bias awareness workshops for all employees, overseen by an independent diversity council. We will expand our existing safety training program into a comprehensive Barista Lifeline initiative, free CPR and first aid courses for every team member, with no cost or scheduling barriers. Furthermore, we are establishing the Ava Thompson Community Fund, which will allocate $250,000 in grants this year to neighborhood nonprofits teaching life-saving skills in underrepresented areas. We pledge to review our corporate culture policies quarterly and publish the results to ensure transparency and accountability. As cameras flashed, Marshall paused and met Ava's eyes. She stood in the front row, apron replaced by a simple black blazer. Behind him, the HR director announced a confidential hotline for employees to report bias incidents anonymously. A few rows back, regional managers scribbled notes, their earlier skepticism erased by the public admission of fault. When the press conference ended, staff members approached Ava with genuine apologies and whispered thanks. Even Claire, the head barista, offered a tentative handshake and said, "I'm sorry it took this to make us listen." That evening, Ava returned to her neighborhood shop to find it transformed. A laminated poster in the window announced the new free CPR training schedule, and inside, a small plaque dedicated to her read, "In honor of courage, compassion, and the power of one voice." Coworkers greeted her with smiles and gratitude rather than envy. At the register, Mr. Keller handed her a framed copy of the CEO's apology letter, embossed with the company's seal. "You did this," he said softly. "You changed us all." As Ava cleaned up for the night, she reflected on the whirlwind of the past week. A single act of life-saving courage, the wave of viral attention, the bitter backlash, and now this moment of accountability. She felt a surge of cautious hope, knowing that policies could be rewritten on paper, but real change required constant vigilance. Still, as she switched off the espresso machine's power and the lights dimmed, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Brew & Co. had finally owned up to its bias, and in doing so, had honored not just a single hero, but the promise that every life, even one lived behind a coffee counter, deserves to be seen and respected. 6 months had passed since Brew & Co.'s announcement of the Barista Lifeline initiative, and the suburban shop on Maple Street was unrecognizable. The familiar green awning had been replaced with a bold banner reading, "Grand Reopening, Ava Thompson Barista Lifeline Training Hub." Inside, the scent of fresh espresso mingled with the faint antiseptic tang of training dummies and first aid kits stacked neatly along one wall. Between the gleaming espresso machine and the pastry case stood a long table draped in navy cloth, where rows of CPR mannequins waited patiently for eager hands. Ava arrived early, her crisp new uniform, black polo embroidered with lead trainer and silver thread, pressed and unwrinkled. She paused at the door, taking in the transformation. Photographs of her in action lined the foyer, each framed and labeled with the date and the tagline, "Courage in Crisis." At the center hung a polished plaque, "In honor of Ava Thompson, you showed us that every second counts." Her heart swelled with both pride and humility. She carried a small stack of training manuals to the table and arranged them by height, just as she would configure a row of coffee cups. As the clock struck 9, a trickle of attendees arrived. New hires clutching notebooks, local high school students in matching t-shirts that bore the shop's steaming mug logo. Even Mr. Lawson himself, wearing a navy polo with the Brew & Company emblem. He approached her with cautious gratitude. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," he said softly, offering her a single red rose. Ava accepted it with a warm smile, her hand steady as she tucked it into the collar of her apron. "Welcome," she began, voice calm and confident, projecting across the packed shop. Above her, the familiar hum of grinders gave way to respectful silence. She led them through the history of the incident. No names of detractors, only the facts of that Thursday morning and her decision to act. Then she demonstrated the Heimlich and chest compressions on the mannequin, her movements precise and deliberate. Fist above the navel, 5 thrusts, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, and so on. Every attendee followed suit, their hands positioning on the smooth plastic torso, guided by her clear, unwavering instructions. Between practice rounds, Ava paused to address the deeper lesson: respect. This program isn't just about technique, she told them. It's about seeing the person in front of you, regardless of color, background, or your assumptions about who they are. If you hesitate because of bias, you become the barrier to someone's life. She looked out at their earnest faces, young baristas elbow deep in coffee beans, and seasoned employees with polished name tags, and felt a quiet hope pulse through her. When Mr. Lawson rose to share his perspective, his voice cracked with emotion. I wasn't just saved, I was seen, heard, and valued. That's a lesson I'll carry beyond this shop. After the formal training, Ava invited everyone to the sidewall-crowned Heroes Gallery, where staff photos were mounted under brass plaques. Beside her own image, she had added a new portrait, her instructing a row of mannequins, eyes bright with purpose. New names, trainees who'd completed the course that morning, were added beneath hers. As each participant pressed a hand against the cool glass of their plaque, an assistant snapped photos for social media, the hashtag number Barista Lifeline trending locally once more. When the last mannequin was packed away and the final coffee cup rinsed, Ava stood by the front window, watching her community, black, white, and every shade between, linger over lattes and lingered conversation. She sipped her own cappuccino, its foam etched with a delicate leaf, and let the air of camaraderie settle around her like warm steam. A young girl in a school uniform approached shyly, holding out a crumpled notebook. Will you sign this? She asked, eyes wide. Ava took the pen, paused to write, and beneath her name added a simple message: your kindness can save a life. As the afternoon light softened and the shop's doors closed for the day, Ava turned off the open sign and locked up. In the quiet that followed, she reflected on the journey from that first terrifying moment, when a customer's choking fit tested her resolve, to this vibrant hub of learning and accountability. The coffee cups around her had been refilled countless times, but it was the hearts and minds of her colleagues and community that truly brimmed anew. And in that realization, she found the sweetest reward of all, knowing that the life she saved was only the beginning of a legacy stronger than any cup of coffee.